I'm going to talk about our research into the VR sector and what we're expecting in terms of the adoption rates and some of the challenges that we're facing, and also some of the forecasts for spending on various bits of content, more specifically games, because that's where the premium paid for content really is in terms of the market. Just 10 seconds on IHS. IHS is a leading market research company. We have 2,500 research analysts tracking all forms of different vertical industries. I work within a team in the IHS technology division, and we research the entire value chain of technology along from the silicon used in different devices all the way to the end user, whether that's a business or a consumer. I head up the games team and the VR research within that team. Okay, so why the excitement? So I just want to give a little bit of context in the background to VR and why it's becoming, why it's such an exciting thing for a lot of different industry parties. So direct consumer spending on entertainment is a massive industry globally. It's 360 billion euros across all forms of direct spending on entertainment. If you look at how important games is, or interactive content, it's actually a growing segment of that overall portion. So around just over 20% growth in 2015, 20% of the market opportunity. Indicates that there is a broadening audience for interactive content, and obviously VR fits into that sort of category. If you look back at the sort of history of development of waves of market opportunities in terms of consumer content and consumer technology, it's the bringing together of exciting technology and content, compelling content, those two marrying together, which produces market opportunities, significant market opportunities. The most recent, obviously, is the development of the smartphone and the app stores. That's obviously driven significant spending on content. Is virtual reality next? That's the kind of question we're up against at the moment. So we're in a position where everything is much more aligned in terms of the VR opportunity. Obviously, in the past, we've had a lot of different experiments in terms of consumer VR, which haven't been successful. And now the technology from those different technology waves that we've seen, so the development of smartphones, the development of screen technology, all those things have come together to allow us to enter what is a race for consumer VR. It's worth noting that obviously not all technology that technology companies and consumer electronics companies push on to consumers necessarily does very well from a content perspective. So 3D TVs is a great example recently, where there was a massive push from the consumer electronics industries to get us to buy 3D TVs, but there was no sort of compelling content which kind of brought those two dynamics together. So it sort of fizzled out as an opportunity, and obviously VR is the kind of next wave that the consumer electronics industry has latched onto. So there's a race, as I was saying, all those technologies are coming together. There's a race to build a market and become a leader in the market and to position yourself within the market. If you look at the different headset companies that are operating in the space, they all have different drivers for them to come into the market, and some are unique to those specific companies. There's kind of broad strategies. Also, so the smartphone companies, for example, it's more about building an ecosystem and supporting their existing devices at the moment. Selling their smartphones like the Galaxy S7, for example. And you could say the same of PlayStation, wants to support its console business. Not all of the participants in the headset space are really centered on making VR a thing, i.e. building a big content infrastructure ecosystem and building the market from that perspective. It's more a means to an end at the moment to support their other hardware businesses. So that's a kind of note of caution in terms of what are the reasons for participation in this market at the moment. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the action is taking place at the cheaper end of the market, so we're seeing a huge number of different smartphone manufacturers. We've had that sort of cardboard and then plastic headset development, third-party plastic headset. Now we're getting into smartphone companies that are building their own headsets to support their smartphone businesses. Obviously, Samsung was the leader in that context. But we're seeing a significant increase in annual shipments, what we expect to be the annual shipments for this year compared to last year. This is a global number. So around a little under 12 million annual shipments of what we describe as adapter headsets, so ones that insert a smartphone into. Interestingly, in terms of the strategies of getting those devices into the market, it's really about bundling and promotional strategies as opposed for consumers that are going out there and actually buying those devices. And our view is that those consumers that invest in a product are much more likely to spend on premium content as opposed to receiving it as part of a bundle or for free or in a promotional basis. They're less monetizable audience, although it's the biggest volume at the moment, as you can see from this share. So 80% of the volume of adapter headsets which ships this year will be promotional or in bundles. So we think we're heading towards a kind of more commoditization. So this bundling strategy, how long is that going to go on for? It's kind of a question that can't really be answered at the moment. How long will they be successful as strategies? How long will they differentiate from the smartphone manufacturer's perspective? How long will they differentiate their product offering to have a VR headset and to bundle it? The amount of companies that are actually getting into this space suggests that it won't actually be that long. So will that promotional effort continue? But we're seeing as a response to that, companies actually going a step further and building an ecosystem of other products to support the broader messaging of devices. So Samsung and LG have, during Mobile World Congress, obviously announced 360 cameras. I think there's quite a significant question about content in this context, so that all these companies are racing to get their headsets into the market, but actually very few are building competent content strategies. So there is a vacuum of content for the headsets that are coming into the market. Samsung is probably a good exception because they have built a much more robust content strategy. But even Samsung is relying, when the Gear VR launched, it relied on significant amounts of 2D video content. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a good selling point for a VR headset. It's not really true immersive VR. It's just, in effect, a big screen to watch 2D content on. And progressively, the companies are relying on the users to actually generate the content. And again, I'm not sure if that's enough to monetize or to promote people to actually get into these headsets. So I think there's a question mark. The race has basically resulted in more hardware than content being coming into the market. So that's something that's got to be looked at. So while this race is going on, there are still a number of technological challenges for all types of headset. So there's been a few questions around sort of fogging up, around overheating in terms of adapter headsets, the sensor not being able to have positional tracking, all those kind of things, which limit that experience. The mixed quality of experience you can get for different headsets in the mobile space. One person trying different headsets and comparing it with another user it's going to be a completely different experience for them. So there's not that kind of standard experience, and I think that weighs on the potential to monetize that audience. Even on the high end, there's obviously those other factors, the tethered nature of the high expense, etc., etc. So we're not there yet in terms of the technology. And those weaknesses are reflected in our forecasts for installed base. So this is across all headsets. This is our installed base forecast on a world basis. A significant leap up from 2015 to 2016 due to a lot of the promotional activity and bundling activity of the smartphone companies. We're not sure. It's very difficult to predict how long that's going to last as a strategy for those companies, because that is a cheap and quick way of getting those hardware into the market. So we haven't extended that massively into the following years, but this is based on the technology we see at the moment and some of the strategies we see at the moment. This is our forecast for adoption across all different headsets. And if you compare that to some other technologies, I guess the interesting points are, so this chart compares it with the adoption of 3D TVs and Blu-ray players, some of the sort of base rates that we compared it with. Early adoption, because VR is possibly unique in the fact that it's addressable to lots of different audiences that use lots of different devices, so smartphone, PC, and console. That's fairly unique as a peripheral to be able to talk to those different audiences. That early adoption is quite significant. Where we're less convinced is this switch to a more mass market adoption, where everything starts to ramp up in the years sort of from 5, 6 into 7. I don't think we've got the technology yet. Certainly haven't got the content yet, but we haven't got the technology yet, with the idea that content will obviously improve over time, but we haven't got the technology yet to drive that mass market adoption as yet. And this is what we see, the kind of roadmap. This is the sort of end game that we want to head towards, which is bringing together the experience of both adapter headsets and high-end headsets, getting the high-end experience in something that's much more portable and untethered, that has positional tracking, that is standalone and self-powered. That's where the sort of end game is, and that's where this becomes a much more mass market proposition, we feel, obviously a more cheaply priced proposition than the high-end headsets today. But if you think about the technology roadmaps and the technology we see in the market today, so things like HoloLens at $3,000, a self-powered, only lasts for a few hours. There's lots of challenges, and I think we're going to be waiting a good few years before we see something that's really reached a good delivery of experience covering these kind of technology areas. There's obviously some examples out there at the moment. I consider things like the LG, which runs off a mobile device, is sort of VR 1.1. It's not a great implementation by all accounts. There's some other, so quite a lot of experimentation in China, for example, on devices which are self-powered. We think these implementations are probably 2 to 3 years ahead of really the technology catching up to be able to deliver a really good experience that the market is going to find. You're going to get traction in the market with that kind of product. So we don't expect these to make a significant impact in the moment. So this is the install base, the number for 2016, which was the 14 million expectation for the end of this year. This is the split. So you can see it's predominantly mobile, with a small portion given over to console and PC. And if you look at the brand splits, this is our expectation of the brand splits for the end of this year. So if you're building content and you want to monetize that content, it's premium paid for content, you've got to build your business planning in that context of relatively small addressable market, with the idea that potentially you could penetrate a certain percentage of that addressable market and sell a number of units. You've got to think about your investment. I've got an example later on the kind of ideas that I'm talking about. If you're building promotional content, like branded content, which a lot of content is at the moment in terms of VR, sponsored by brands and built by agencies, you might want to go for the other headset, which is basically app distribution, but other headsets and Google Cardboard, that's a significant volume of the market. But our expectation is that audience is there to just passively have free content. They're not necessarily going to monetize significantly well with premium content. So there is a certain amount of fragmentation within that 44%. There's tens of different headsets giving different experiences, although they're all distributed to via the app stores, and a certain amount of fragmentation. The fragmentation is worse when you have different control. There's no kind of standardization of control mechanism, so that is another challenge on top in terms of producing content. You've got to be aware of that as well. So, looking at the emerging VR content opportunity, this is one of the ways we look at VR content, and I think several of the talks previously had described this kind of scale of content where you go up a sort of interactive scale, in effect. So we have very linear content on one end, which is the most basic, could be user-generated using the new 360 cameras. It's monoscopic, it's not depth, it's not... I would describe it as very, the lowest end of VR content. It's not really particularly immersive. But where I think there is some interesting work being done, and there's potential to do some interesting work, is in this kind of middle ground of interactivity, where I think, as has been described, the workflow of more traditional industries is actually put into 3D games engines, and the output is more interactive as a result. So I think some really interesting developments. I also think multi-user experiences are very powerful in VR. So I think the concept of social network, and I think Facebook is potentially onto a very interesting and good thing in terms of building some sort of representation of social experiences within VR. And virtual worlds is obviously another context. And just to point out that because we have this kind of interactive scale, we have the traditional industries moving up this interactive scale, the overlap in skills needed for those different productions of VR experiences is actually overlapping significantly between the traditional sectors, so games, video and film industry, and obviously the new industry, which is VR content industry. There is significant overlap, and I think that means that there will be significant demand for skills and expertise over the next 18 months to 2 years, a real demand from different areas of different industries. So an interesting dynamic developing within the industries as well. If you look at the different categories of content that are available to the market, and there's a lot more free promotional or ad-supported content at the moment. If you're categorizing it by whether it's paid for or premium, it's obviously mostly centered on games. There's a few VR experience. Adult content is another one. But games is really where the content opportunity is centered in terms of selling the high-end devices, obviously. And this is our forecast for how much is going to be spent on premium games, so paid-for games in the context of VR. A little under 400 million euros this year. It's not small numbers, but it's not, if you compare that with the total games app opportunity, or the total console opportunity, or the total PC games opportunity, it's just a sub-segment of that. So it's, there's opportunity there, but it's not off the Richter scale, sort of serious opportunities compared to other sectors within the games opportunity. What is interesting is that if you look at some of the content genres that are coming to the fore in terms of the usage of games and the download of games, so this is from the Oculus Share, and sort of aggregation of the different genres and the type of experiences you can get, they are markedly different from traditional games experiences. So it sounds like it's going to be an incremental opportunity as well in relation to these other game sectors. So I talked about the monetization potential of different platforms. I think if you look at the sort of scale of monetization. So the ones on the left are the least monetizable in terms of premium content, in terms of the addressable market. Across to the right for the most monetizable opportunity. These are where you should be thinking about if you're building premium content. The addressable market by the end of 2016 is approaching 5 million, which again is not a small number, but you've got to have that in the context. It's not sort of smartphone numbers, it's not other sort of consumer electronics numbers. The addressable market for consoles, for example, is in the tens of millions. It's a smaller opportunity, but there is less content as well, so you've got to take that into context as well. So just a sort of example of what you've got to expect. For example, this is our forecast for the Gear VR install base at the end of 2016 on a global basis, just a little over 2 million, current forecast. What's your potential attach rate for a bit of premium content? Can you achieve 10%? Possibly. Could you achieve 5% more realistically? Yes. So what are your sales volume potential? It's an easy sum to do, but it gives you an idea of the scale that you should be investing and sort of working towards in terms of planning your opportunities. So just some key takeaways in terms of content producers for premium content. There is definitely a vacuum of premium content available, even across games. Certainly across kind of adapter headsets and adapter headsets that are coming to market. So there's an opportunity to work to produce content that can be sold via those devices, or people that are trying to build content ecosystems in those areas. But you've got to be realistic about your return on investment and plan accordingly. We recommend, minimizing your risk by going multi-platform as far as you can, as long as you try and build experiences which take advantage of those platforms as well. You don't make them too generic and not appropriate for those platforms. Again, a large majority of monetization will occur on those devices, that either the high-end devices or those devices that people have invested money in. If you've got a promotional cardboard, it's much less likely that you're going to actually spend money on content, premium content. And I mentioned, again, just to wrap up, the overlap between those skills, and the demand for VR skills are going to increase over probably the next 18 months to 2 years. If you're investing in VR expertise now, it's actually adding value to your company, even if you're not actually getting huge returns on investment directly from the consumer. So it's worthwhile doing just to build up the expertise. And that is me done. Thank you very much.